ensure that there are increased economic, social, and creative opportunities for current and future generations. It's our responsibility to strengthen relationships with Indigenous communities and build a more inclusive future. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd just like to mention a couple of housekeeping matters. Following the talk this evening, there will be a Q&A session. We've set up some mics in the aisles for that purpose. And after the Q&A session, we would like to invite you to share in some light refreshments. We'll have some cookies and fruit and whatnot. I just ask that we don't bring any food into the theater. No food or drink is allowed in the auditorium. So we'll enjoy our snack outside of the auditorium. I'd also encourage you to check out the University of Regina Press table, which is outside of the auditorium as well. They're here this evening selling copies of Charlie's book, Children of the Broken Treaty. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Charlie Angus, former MP for Timmins, James Bay. He served for 2 decades in that role, first elected in 2004. He was the NDP critic for ethics, natural resources, FedNor, Indigenous youth, income inequality and affordability, and deputy critic for Labour. Charlie is a member of the Council of Canadians, and he was instrumental in developing the Pledge for Canada. He is the author of 9 books, including the most recent, Dangerous Memory, Coming of Age in the Decade of Greed. Charlie is a songwriter, a musician, and the lead singer of the Juno-nominated Grievous Angels. He is a grassroots activist, leader with the Resistance, and host of the newly founded Midas Canada Network. Please join me in welcoming Charlie Angus.
In place, and then you realize that you also needed to have culture in the first arts council in North America here in Saskatchewan, right? This is the land of the treaties, and it's a relationship that we're going to live and build on. And this is the birthplace of public medicine in North America right here, against all odds. So the reason I'm saying the little Marlboro man wouldn't have lasted very long in Canada, right? And that's a fundamental difference, because to survive here, you need neighbors and you need each other. That's what makes us Canadian. And we're going to talk about how we need each other now more than ever. Because my God, what a week. Do you really want me to go through it? If there's anyone here who wants me to talk about the soybean crisis and maybe we're going to get a tariff deal, I'm going to let you down. I'm sorry, because you know as well as I do, they have no intention of making a deal to make things better for their people and for our people. But just this past week, Charlie Kirk was murdered, and then he was turned into the MAGA Jesus, and Jimmy Kimmel got fired, and then they had to bring him back because of the mass protests of people boycotting Amazon or Disney, and I say keep boycotting Disney. Why not? I think that's a good habit to get into. And this week, we saw more provocations as Russia Russian jets are flying now into other sovereign countries. We are getting more and more dangerously close to the edge. And this week, Canada recognized Palestine as a state. So Canada says that they can't recognize the genocide until they have more evidence. Absolute gutless. And so you're watching the disintegration of the rule of law in real time. You're watching people being mass starved in real time. And you're wondering what the hell happened to our world. That's the issue that's confronting us. And also what happened this week. 1,200 people at Alligator Alcatraz have been disappeared. That didn't really make much news. But it shows the growth of the Gulag system of people who were first kidnapped off the street. Because if you can kidnap people off the street, then you can do anything with them. And now they don't know where 1,200 people are. And we don't know how many of them are possibly Canadian, because at least 150 Canadians have been kidnapped. That's what happens when the rule of law disintegrates. And so that's what you're watching as well. And this week, amongst the rising hate rhetoric that we're seeing coming out of MAGA, Steve Bannon announced that it was time to take the blowtorch to the universities. And I point this out because I think it's really important for us to understand what we're dealing with here. We are just at the beginning of the storm. And the storm is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I can't sugarcoat it any other way. The storm is going to come in a number of forms. The storm is going to come in the creation of this regional discord. You know, that the day that Donald Trump threatened our country, Danielle Smith went down to Mar-a-Lago. Not with Team Alberta, she went down with Kevin O'Leary and Jordan Peterson. I mean, the grifter crew. And suddenly, now we're talking about breaking up our country. And the guy who's leading it is an ex-Marine. Oh my God. Do they think we're dumb? What's happening here is you're going to see regional discord. We can't let them divide us from each other. Because that's going to be the first part of the storm. The second part of the storm is going to be the wash over us of bots and AI and disinformation. It's already happening. And what you're going to see, and you see this, that this playbook, this fascist authoritarian playbook, it looks like chaos. It's not chaos. These are patterns. And we're going to talk about patterns tonight. Because once you can identify the patterns, you can resist the patterns. So in Europe right now, the disinformation, the rage, is about immigration. So expect that here in Canada. And then the third part of the storm is on our border. Because at a certain point, it's going to dawn on Donald Trump, maybe, that instead of threatening to send helicopters in the army against Chicago and Memphis and Los Angeles, he's got people just on the other side of the border that he says are the meanest and nastiest people he's ever dealt with. So that's the face of the storm. The reason the storm is being held back right now isn't the good part of the story, and we're going to talk about some more of the good parts of the story as we get on. Is Canadians have shown an incredible level of determination. Canadians have surprised the world, and I'm saying this is why I'm here tonight. I travel across this country and I've seen the determination of Canadians to stand up for our basic values of democracy and decency and inclusion. It is a really inspiring thing. And I hear messages every single day through my work with the Midas Network from all over the world. Because everybody is as frightened as we are at this time. But they're looking at Canada and they see that we're a nation that hasn't broken yet. That we're holding the line. That we may just be a light in a dark time. We got to keep thinking about that, because you're not going to hear that in the media. You're not going to hear that in online because of the rage and the disinformation. but to trust in our innate goodness and trust in each other. This is what's going to get us through. So tonight the talk is going to be a little different because the university asked me to talk about the threat that's being posed to higher education. And I thought it would be a good way to sort of lay out a bit of how the right-wing playbook is. You know, there's Project 2025 that we're hearing a lot about, but it goes way back. Rush Limbaugh laid it out. Rush Limbaugh laid out, he called the four corners of deceit that had to be destroyed for the right. Number one was government. It's not just that Doge went through and fired hundreds of thousands of workers and they got rid of independent levels of government whose job it is to oversee and make sure that there's checks and balances. It's the attack on government is to make you not trust that government can help, that you're on your own. That was the first of Rush Limbaugh's points that they had to break. The second Rush Limbaugh said was media. And we've already seen the disintegration of media. The lawsuits that Donald Trump's posting, how 60 Minutes had to bend down and kiss the ring. But it's also the rise of mass disinformation. We're not going to get into it tonight, but the disinformation machine was created first in 2014 with the Internet Research Agency. They called it Moscow to run disinformation about when Russia was actually invading Ukraine and saying they weren't there. And it worked so well that it had us all so confused that those same bots and operatives began to move into Europe and began to spread support Marine Le Pen, the National Front in France, supported, financed by Russia. The ADF in Germany, supported, financed by Russia, and disinformation. And then Brexit, a total con job. And this is again where we got to watch about the dangers of these referendums, that the people were fed constant disinformation, and Brexit was the result. And Europe is a much weaker place. And then those exact same bot machines and bot armies were in the 2016 election, supporting Donald Trump. Again, we're not going to go far deep into it, but at one point, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, said that he thought that Donald Trump was a paid agent of the Russian state. That's how deep they were in with Russian money. So you have the deceits that they're going to break, and they're going to break government. They're going to break our trust in the media. The next identified target was science. And you see this with the CDC, the attack on the Center for Disease Control, the fact that they put RFK Jr. in charge of the gold standard of medical research. They fired thousands of the world's top medical researchers. They fired the entire vaccine advisory team. They fired the woman in charge of the CDC because she wouldn't go along with their whack job pronouncements. And they replaced her, what was the guy's name? His name's Jim O'Neill. So Jim O'Neill is now in charge of the Center for Disease Control. So what's his background? He doesn't know damn thing about medicine or science. But he worked for Peter Thiel, one of the Dark Lords. And his job was they're going to build these islands where all the billionaires can live free of government. This guy's in charge of the CDC. So this is the attack on science. So that we're now having fluoridated vaccine mandates in children. And now measles is back. The polio is back. My grandmother was a nurse on the polio children's ward. She never got over things like rubella and whooping cough and seeing young children die. And now that's supposed to be the price of freedom? And Canada had some of the highest vaccine rates in the world, and the gold standard was Alberta. And now Canada is the only country in the top 10 for the highest measles rates in the world, and we're the only first world country. And that's the power of disinformation. So that's the third pillar. of the attack. And the fourth pillar of deceit they said they had to destroy was academia, the universities. And I think that that's a really profound thing, because the thing about universities is that they're supposed to be where we come and we learn and we debate and we create minds. But if you can break the trust there, you can get away with anything. You know, there was a study done recently of red states in the United States where more and more professors, even teachers at grade schools, feel now they're threatened unless they're teaching the ideology. And it brings us to the Charlie Kirk murder. Because what made Kirk gave his name was he was a number of men influencers who saw the university as a place to do debates, where he would go and say provocative things like, talking about racialized people not being smart enough to have jobs, to force confrontation. But this is not a playbook that Charlie Kirk invented. It goes back to Steve Bannon and Neo Yiannopoulos in 2016. They decided that they would start these culture wars in the universities. And Yiannopoulos' tour then was that feminism was a form of cancer. Debate. Well, that's not a debate, that's a provocation. And what they were trying to do was create violence on the universities. And they did it at Berkeley, they did it at Portland, and it led to the violence at Charlottesville. So now that we've had violence in Utah, now it's the excuse that Steve Bannon says to bring the blowtorches to the universities. So that's the grassroots attack on academia. But from the get-go with Donald Trump was the full-on assault on education. And he didn't go after some community college. He went after the biggest, most impressive institutions in the nation. And he made them bend and break and kiss his ring. He went after Columbia, and they folded. He went after Cornell, and they broke. He shook down Berkeley, and he handed over the names of hundreds of students and professors to be investigated. What kind of public institution turns over people who debate on campus to what we see the lawlessness there? He broke the Smithsonian Institute and made them take down displays that offended him, to the point that the Smithsonian Institute was rewriting the history of what happened in 2020. Now the Smithsonian Institute's been ordered to rewrite the history of slavery. Shame. This is the shame. But this is the thing, I call it the Bagel Plaza principle. The Bagel Plaza is in Berlin. That's where they burned the books. You know, as a kid, reading all those German histories, I used to see that picture, the famous picture of the book burning. And I thought it was in some alleyway, it was dark. They took the books and burned them in the center of Berlin, in the cultural heart of what was then the greatest city in Europe. Because Berlin and Germany was the academic center of the world. For science, for philosophy, for architecture, for design, for music, for literature, it was all in Berlin. So when they dragged the books out and burnt them at the Bagel Plaza, they were sending a message. If we do this here, we can do this anywhere. So when they went after the Ivy League schools, they were sending a message. If we can make them bend and break, you'll bend and break too. If we can make the Smithsonian bend and break, and say history can be rewritten by our orders, you will rewrite history too. And then they went after Harvard. So far it's touch and go whether Harvard's going to stand up to them or not. But what they did with Harvard, and it's really important for us, because I think there's something that we need to consider for Canada. They announced that Harvard's foreign students represented a national security threat, and they were not going to be able to bring foreign students. And the very first public kidnappings in the United States were students. A woman who was a Fulbright scholar was kidnapped and disappeared into ICE. Again, they were sending messages. If we could take a Fulbright scholar and drag her off the streets and put her in a cage, we could do that to you too. So now, there's this essay I read about, is Donald Trump the Manchurian candidate? You know, the Frank Sinatra movie where they got the stooge representing the Russians, and he's going to take over America in order to supply the Russians with what they want. But anyways, this essay on whether Donald Trump is or isn't the Manchurian candidate said he couldn't be the Manchurian candidate because no Manchurian candidate would be that audacious and crazy. He'd be at least a little more subtle. I say that because no matter what happens with Harvard resisting, Harvard is finished now as the world center for academic research. Because the advantage the Americans had is that people who were the best and brightest from all over the world wanted to go to those Ivy League schools. And they could poach the best and the brightest. And if you look at the 10 top universities in the world right now, this is my Manchurian candidate theory here. If you look at the top 10 universities in the world, Harvard is ranked number 1. The next 9 are China, except number 4, the University of Toronto. So once you pull out Harvard and kick it to the ground, you've decided that America is no longer going to be the leader in this century. You've just handed it over to China. I'm going to get to the University of Toronto in Canada in a second. But the other element that's really important to understand in the threat to academia is to go back to what happened after the book burnings. Because after the book burnings, German universities decided that they would go along to get along. And they changed their curriculum. And they tried to be good, quiet, but obedient Nazis. And what happened was the best and the brightest left Germany. The greatest scientists, the greatest thinkers, the greatest philosophers, the greatest writers. And where did they go? They went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they went to Princeton. The American century was made possible because of all that German talent. So right now, there are so many of the world's top researchers desperate to get out of Trump land. Canada has a huge opportunity. Because we are different than the Americans in terms of our universities. Because we have public education. You know, they have their Ivy Leagues and then they have everybody else. But there's no reason why University of Regina doesn't step up to become a global center for research. There's no reason the University of Alberta doesn't step up. University of Toronto has taken some of the top thinkers already out of Yale, the ones who've written about fascism and authoritarianism. Timothy Snyder, Jason Stanley, Marcy Short, they've all come to University of Toronto. But we have the potential in Canada, because of our university systems, to become the new global research center, the new global medical center. That could be the voice and place for the world right now, because they want to get out because of the threats. Well, what's stopping it? Well, our premiers are doing a pretty damn good job of undercutting our own education system, right? And our premiers are doing a pretty damn good job of going on about all those woke students. And, you know, Pierre Poilievre was saying that he's going to bring in laws to go after cut funding to universities who are woke. And foreign students. We demonize the foreign students as well. I mean, Daniel Smith going after books. But I gotta thank Daniel Smith for that. Because Daniel Smith has reminded us that in this age, books matter. And as the people of Alberta stood up and said, are you nuts? You're gonna ban The Handmaid's Tale in 1984? Not on our watch. So, we have this potential, and we have our Prime Minister talking about nation-building projects. Well, I think an obvious nation-building project will be for us to set up the research capacity, as well the amount of doctors You want to cross the border? So what if we invest instead of underfunding? We could build a center in every one of our communities that reaches for it. So that's an opportunity. So that's my element on the four threats. I want